Hello, Manchester, and welcome to this edition of Girard at Large. I am your still cooped up host, Rich Girard. Thanks for tuning in. As you know, you can still find us online at girardatlarge.com, and you can find us on Facebook and Twitter, also at Girard at Large, where we encourage you to like us and to follow us because we just want to be loved. Gee, I don't know which way the focus is better or not. I'm trying to look right at the camera instead of down at my face so that you can not see me looking at you. So hopefully this is going to work today. I obviously struck a nerve last week with my criticism of the teacher's contract. Rest assured there's more to come, though I probably won't get into it much today. There's nothing new for me to add, but I will be posting a blog to girardatlarge.com with some pretty interesting information, not only about the current contract, but how it compares to other proposals that were put forward by the Special Committee on Negotiations, which I had the honor and privilege of chairing for the last 2 years. Why would I do such a thing? Well, to show that you can both be more fiscally responsible than this contract was and better direct resources to where they really need to be directed. And that, according to the union itself at one point at the negotiating table, was to the newer and younger teachers who have had so much difficulty trying to survive in the Queen City as teachers. And, we needed a quote unquote competitive advantage, or we needed to shrink the competitive advantage of other districts. Hopefully you folks are taking to quarantine well. I find myself in the fortunate position of being an essential employee, so I, by right, get to escape my home, which I've done today, and you might notice a somewhat different background. This is the financial services office that I inhabit most of the time when I'm working. It's a little too busy at my house with the 2 college kids who can't return, the 2 elementary school kids who can't return, the high school senior who can't return, and the wife who's a teacher who can't return. So in a frenetic house that has lots and lots of people trying to do lots and lots of things in a defined space, I must admit it's good to get away. Besides, I get so many questions from people who saw last week's broadcast. I thought it might not be a bad idea for me to change scenery. The short answer to your question about all those books in the background of my home office is yes, I have read almost all of them. And so it just goes to show if you, the whole garbage in, garbage out principle, well, good stuff in, good stuff out works too. Anyway, we are in week, God knows what week, God knows what of what in the COVID quarantine, as a bunch of policymakers across the board are patting themselves on the back for the wonderful job they've done in causing the models that they keep using to project fewer and fewer and fewer people are going to be infected and killed by this disease. There's an interesting phenomenon out there that you don't see in many places, at least reported in many places, and that is as COVID-19 deaths in the country have risen, particularly in the state and city of New York, we've seen something odd happen. As COVID-19 deaths go up, deaths from things like cancer, heart disease, stroke, other things have precipitously declined. Now, why would that happen? Why would you see COVID-19 deaths everywhere, but more quote unquote normal causes of death, be it flu, be it pneumonia, be it cancer, be it heart attack, heart disease, or things like that? Why would they be on the decline? I know. As you know, I typically watch the broadcasts, the president's, news conferences, their daily news conferences, updating us all on the pandemic panic that has gripped the nation. And Dr. Deborah Birx, who's become a bit of a celebrity through all of this, said something really, really interesting a couple days ago that I picked up on, and I thought, doesn't that make sense? And it starts to raise some really interesting questions about just how many people are actually succumbing or to COVID-19, in other words, where COVID-19 is the, in fact, cause of death. The thing that Dr. Birx said, that caught my attention is that in other countries, when there's an underlying health condition, such as congestive heart failure or cancer or something like that, if the person also contracts COVID-19 and they die, then those other countries are typically categorizing the death as being caused by the primary health condition, let's say cancer, okay? Or let's say pneumonia, or let's say heart disease, whatever it is, okay? But in the United States, people who die with, and that was a key point, people who die with COVID-19 are being counted as COVID-19 deaths. Now, they're not saying that COVID-19, not to be confused with Ovid Lamontagne, they're not saying that COVID-19 actually was the cause of death. They're merely saying they had COVID-19 when they died. Now, I found that particularly interesting, and now we have evidence of that because you can see, go look it up for yourself, you can actually see that in New York State and City, and why are we looking at New York? Because New York is where most of the cases are. You can actually see the number of causes of death, the number of deaths caused by more routine or normal things have plunged while COVID-19 has been on the scene, which means people with the disease are being counted as killed by the disease, even though the underlying health condition they have was in fact the cause of death. In other words, if they never had contracted COVID-19, they'd probably be dead in a week or two anyway. So since we have COVID-19 in there, well, we're going to say that COVID-19 was the cause of death, which is raising a lot of concern about the legitimacy of the numbers, as are some statements that Dr. Anthony Fauci has made. One in particular was his opposition to herd immunity. Dr. Fauci has been saying things like he really doesn't think we should be getting back to, quote, normal until there's a vaccine, while at the same time saying a vaccine is a year or 18 months off. Well, I don't know what he means by getting back to normal, but if he's trying to suggest that we're going to be like this for another year or year and a half, then you might as well go book your cruise with the Tidy Bowl man, put a little extra water in before you flush, because not only will the economy be gone, but the country will be gone. And while we're, and actually, I'm not saying that for the sake of saying it or for hyperbole sake. If you understand the United States of America, you understand what Calvin Coolidge once said as president, and that is the business of America is business. And one of the things that we see taking place across the country now in certain political circles, like Rahm Emanuel's brother, who's some kind of doctor, saying, absolutely, we need to keep the total country shut down until we have a vaccine. Too dangerous to let people out and about until we have a vaccine. Oh, really? This coming amidst all of these model revisions, which every time they've revised the model since creating them, they have never projected things going up. They've only projected things going down. But one of the curious statements, and I'll paraphrase, by Dr. Fauci, was that we don't want herd immunity. In other words, we don't want a lot of people to get this so that we build up our natural immunity as human beings to something that we've been exposed to, which is a really curious thought to me, especially since it's really kind of herd immunity that protects us in general from so many diseases out there. Look, you just can't come up with a vaccine for everything. But this is the same guy who said he hopes that as a result of this, we will never, ever, 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 ever be allowed to shake hands again. He thinks that shaking hands is a horrible, you know, that reminds me too, now with all this social distancing and not shaking hands and everything else, what exactly has happened to, say, cases of the flu and cases of pneumonia? Have those gone down? Nobody's talking about that. Maybe they have, maybe they haven't. But it seems to me that this is that certain of the medical professionals are trying to set the stage by both creating an hysteria over the number of deaths, which is artificially high because of how they're counting the deaths of people with COVID-19, where COVID-19 was not necessarily the cause of death, and now saying that we should continue with this for an indefinite period of time, at least until there's some kind of vaccine. Meanwhile, we're breaking our necks to come through and do more testing. And there's a really interesting discussion now taking place about what is going on with so-called antibody testing. In other words, testing a wide number of people that may or may not have been exposed to the virus to determine who has and who is therefore going to be naturally immune to it in the future. So-called that herd immunity that Dr. Fauci doesn't want us to develop is something that we're going to test for. And to me, as I've said to you, the testing is the real key here because in my never to be humble opinion, as your ever humble host, we should try to get testing done on a vast scale, not just people suspected of having COVID-19, which, by the way, the vast majority of those tested still are proving not to have the virus. Some 86% last I heard of the people taking the test were not positive for COVID-19. What's that tell you? That tells you that perhaps a lot of things are being feared as COVID-19 when they're not. But to me, you know, the whole point of this, and maybe as we get there, what we really should be looking to do, folks, are quarantine those who are sick. I think I've said this before in the prior two shows. When was the last time you ever heard of quarantining the healthy to try to stop the spread of a disease? If people have got it, they should stay home. If people don't have it, they should be allowed to leave their houses. Unless, of course, you're Joyce Craig, in which case it doesn't matter whether you or members of your family have it or not. You just take the dog for a walk or otherwise leave your home, even though you sent a letter to the governor urging him to order everyone to not leave their home. How does that work? Welcome to politics. But we have this situation where we are applying this blanket prescription across the country, and it just doesn't make sense. In fact, I think it was the governor of, it was one of the two Dakotas. I forget if it was North or South, woman governor, name is escaping my mind. But she just gave a brilliant speech on how what is necessary in New York City is not necessary in North Dakota. And she talked about our federalist system of government in her state and our national constitution as those things that prevent government from doing many of the things that it's doing. For example, did you know that your government is doing to you what the Chinese government was doing and still is doing to its citizens? And that is tracking people via their cell phone data to make sure that they are not gathering in groups of more than 10. Did you know that? Did you know that the governor of Rhode Island has ordered her National Guard and state police to go knocking on the doors of homes where neighbors have reported suspicious people from New York State staying at their neighbors' houses to inquire who is staying at their home to determine whether or not disallowed people are in the state? Can you imagine if Donald Trump sent any kind of federal law enforcement, never mind the National Guard, to start knocking on doors to find out whether or not people were harboring, I don't know, illegal aliens? What kind of outcry there would be? The governor of Texas has ordered state troopers to pull, I think the governor of Florida has done the same, to pull over people with Louisiana plates to make sure that they know they're to self-quarantine or otherwise deter them from coming to their states because they're coming from a highly infected area. The list of civil rights abuses go on and on and on. And as digital technology progresses, police departments have ordered so many drones that the drone manufacturers can't keep up. The city of Los Angeles has got what they call a business ambassadors program, where members of the Chamber of Commerce and the city's various inspection divisions are going and knocking on the doors of businesses who are suspected to be violating the non-essential business shutdown order of Mayor Eric Garcetti, a backer of Mayor Joyce Craig, who campaigned for her 4 years ago when she was proclaiming herself an advocate for, open borders and illegal immigrants when he was weighing a presidential run. And so anyway, long story short, almost 400 businesses have been visited by these people who are good-naturedly turning around and saying, gee, did you know that you're a non-essential business and you've been ordered closed? We're here to help. And if they don't close, as more than 150 of them have not, they get a visit from the police department, which basically has slapped padlocks on their doors after hauling them out of their businesses. This is happening in your United States of America. And not for nothing here in the state of New Hampshire, where we haven't seen anything quite like that, we do have Governor Chris Sununu, who on balance, I think has done a reasonable job managing this, doing some things though that I think are not warranted and that I don't think he has either the legal or constitutional authority to do. For example, there was an article in the newspaper the other day that basically said he had issued an executive order allowing town and city officials to grant mass abatements to property owners, commercial property owners in particular, who might not be able to pay their property taxes. And while I might be sympathetic with the idea that businesses who have had their operations shut down, or property owners whose tenants have had their businesses shut down and can't pay rent, might seek relief from the government that caused that imposition, the idea that the governor by fiat can do that is a bit alarming to me, as governors' actions across the country have been, and it doesn't matter whether the governors have been Republican or whether or not they've been Democrat. The thing about this constitutional republic that we live in, folks, is pretty simple. It guarantees individual rights by limiting the authority of government, particularly the authority of the executive, which, if you recall, was kind of a bone of contention with our founding fathers, who did not appreciate what the monarchy was doing to them and their rights, and wanted to make sure that the president, governor, whatever it was, and particularly in New Hampshire, where it's clear the founders of our state gave the majority of authority constitutionally to the general court, that's our legislature, and not to the governor, and not even to the courts. But now the governor has got an enormous amount of power and is using it for a variety of reasons, whether it's ordering the okay of abatements that town officials want to give, or it's imposing stay-at-home orders and determining which businesses are and are not essential to determine who gets to stay open and who gets not to stay open. And if you get to stay open, here's how you get to do business. I think we can take a look around at what's going on, and I think we probably can figure out by now that people who are concerned about their health go to the grocery store. My favorite of you, though, by the way, who wear masks, and I am not one of them. I've worn a mask once, I have to admit. I wore a mask once when I went to get my mother out of the nursing home. Her rehab is done, and she's back at home, praise the Lord. But so I wore it to go into the discharge meeting. I got to a conference room that was just off one of the entrances. I had my own mask, but they brought me an FDA-approved mask, which I wore for my entire time there. They appreciated the fact that I wore the mask, but everything else, I think we can figure out that people probably wouldn't have gone to restaurants. I think people probably wouldn't have done a lot of the things that businesses have been ordered not to provide. And this thing may have taken care of itself, but it may have done so in a way that was not quite so debilitating to the country. By the way, New Hampshire's once 2.6% unemployment rate as of today was announced to be, that's a drum roll for those of you in Suncook, 15%. The unemployment filing claims came out today. The first week of this national shutdown saw 3.3 million people file first-time claims for unemployment. The second week saw 6.6 million file for unemployment. And the good news is it's plateaued. This week, only 6.5 million people have filed for unemployment claims. Hooray. So now we have put, what's that, 6.6 and 6.5. So that's 13.1 plus 3.3 is 14.7 million people out of work because of this, this pandemic, whose models, by the way, have not seen anywhere near the number of people that would be flooding our hospitals, taking up all of our respirators, depleting all of our resources, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so including in New York City, which interestingly now they think New York City went wild because of people visiting not from China, but from Europe. You remember the president shut down the border with China back in January, but it wasn't until early to mid-March where he shut down the border with Europe when it became clear that Europe had a problem. And it looks like the contamination of New York City came largely at the hands of European visitors who were infected unknowingly with the COVID-19, not to be confused with Ovid-Lamontine virus, and thus the pandemonium began. But we still have to recognize that New York State, as with many other states, ran into issues of supplies and capacity for no other reason than they've passed on multiple opportunities since the H1N1 virus to replenish all of their stockpiles of everything from rubber gloves to various medical supplies to, oh yes, respirators. And so the rest of us now have got to deal with this. And I think the president, well, I fundamentally have an issue with what's going on with all of this. I think the president has managed the situation rather well. And I have to say that if some good things come out of this, it will be that the idea that we should not have a robust private sector in a capitalist market economy has been flipped squarely on its head by virtue of what's happening in this pandemic, because no other country is bringing to bear the brilliance, the expertise, and the resources of its private sector to solve this problem, whether it's, you know, multiple companies coming up with testing mechanisms, which I guess are down to now 2 minutes, and being able to put it through their distribution networks and get them rapidly out to the population, whether it's the manufacture of things like gowns and masks and gloves, the so-called personal protective equipment, the marshaling of resources to build these respirators. And Trump is pretty smart, right? What's he saying about the respirators? Once we have what we need, we're going to keep building them so that we can give, read in that cell, them to places like Italy, Spain, France, and Germany, which are being beaten up even worse than we are. Interestingly, just a side note, the nation of Sweden, what has recently been criticized as not doing too well, has taken an alternate route. They have not done the social distancing thing. They have basically warned people that if they have the risk factors that make them particularly vulnerable to COVID-19, that they should stay home. But the rest of you go about your business. In this nation of what, 35, 40 million people, last I checked, at a grand total of 7,000 cases and 400 deaths, something like that. Sweden's, quote, not doing too good. What, versus what? Italy and Spain that have more than half the number that we have in the United States, despite being 1/5 our size, and significantly more deaths? I don't know. So, but I think what we need to do as a nation, and there are a lot of questions that need to be asked. For example, I've been going back and forth with various city staff. I sent the mayor an email because of this whole situation that's been going on with essential personnel and people not being willing to, in the city of Manchester, the aldermen not being willing to furlough anybody who is non-essential. So basically what we're doing here in the city of Manchester is we're paying people to stay home. We're still allowing them to accrue all of their benefits, whether it's sick time, vacation time, et cetera, et cetera. We're still allowing them to accrue all of that as if they were on the job working when they're not. And, but that being said, there's a very dangerous tree in my neighborhood. So I used my phone and the Manchester app, and I sent up a a complaint, and I got an email back saying, oh, well, we're not doing any of that. Essential personnel only are working. So when this COVID-19 thing clears, we'll come out, we'll check the tree. Really? I thought that was interesting. And then I decided that I would check in on some information that I got about inspectors not doing their job, whether it's a building inspector, a housing code inspector, inspectors. Because I read the governor's executive order regarding who was and was not essential, and guess who's essential? The inspectors are essential. And so I sent the mayor an email about that, and she forwarded it to Public Works and to the building department. And well, Public Works sent out their arborist to check out the tree. Guess what? It's dangerous and it will be coming down, and they apologized because that shouldn't have happened. But the building department's kind of interesting. They say that they're still doing all of their new construction estimates and all of that other fun stuff. But they're saying that but things like their proactive housing code inspections have been stopped, but they're responding to complaints, especially if they involve life safety. Oh, that's good. So I said, okay, well, what about all of the properties that have had complaints filed against them because they're illegally operating as sober living facilities in neighborhoods they're not zoned for? Oh no, we've canceled those inspections until it's going to be safe for our inspectors to go in. And they reiterated that, where life safety issues are involved, then they will inspect. So I sent back a coy little note saying, you mean 11 people living in a 3-bedroom single family home is not a life safety issue? Oh, well, I'm sure you appreciate what's going on out there. And when it's safe for our inspectors to go in, we'll send them back in. So you've got employees that have been deemed essential by the governor because of the inspections that they conduct, not being used to do the inspections that they conduct because it's not safe. So the last email I sent back to Mr. Lafreniere, the director of planning, was, what? You mean to tell me that your inspectors can't wear masks, can't wear gloves, can't use hand sanitizer, and can't keep a proper distance away from whoever may be there while inspecting, but folks who work at a grocery store or at a trucking company or a delivery company or any of the other essential businesses, you mean it's okay for them to be unsafe? By your definition, they're working in a hazardous condition. So what is the point of having them on the payroll if you're actually not going to send them out? I mean, what is the point? So, government, while almost 15 million private sector employees have been laid off or furloughed, it's hard to find any government employees anywhere. I got to give props to the city of Portsmouth, which is not exactly a charter member of evilconservative.com. Got to give props to the city of Portsmouth, who I think furloughed, it was either 77 or 90 non-essential employees until this comes around. And hell, why not? If the federal government is going to open up the spigot and give these folks more money than they know what to do with in unemployment benefits, because what? They'll get their regular state unemployment, and then they'll get the extra $600 on top of it, just because the federal government says everybody who's out of work because of COVID-19 gets $600 from the federal government for the next 4 months, $600 a week for the next 4 months. Well, for most people, that's going to get them pretty damn close to what they're making, if not provide them more money than what they're making. What are we doing? So I've got a department head that won't let his inspectors do their inspections because it's too dangerous, and I've got a board of aldermen saying they can sit home and collect their pay. What sense does that make? Yep, it's falling out, and it's probably because of stuff like this. Anyway, so as we continue here, there are some good things that are coming out of this, though, like the demonstration of how capitalism, when put to a task, will mobilize resources and come up with results faster than just about anything or anyone else. That is good news. Maybe since places like, I think, Portsmouth, but cities, even San Francisco, they have now banned reusable bags and ordered grocery stores in particular to start using those evil single-use plastic bags that they once banned as horrible for the environment, because those reusable bags do something they don't like, which if they'd been listening to advocates of the single-use plastic bags who brought up these points, they might have listened to them correctly in the first place, and that is those reusable bags carry disease. COVID-19 can live in the grit and dirt of the fibers of those bags, and therefore they're bad and must be banned, at least until the pandemic's over. So maybe the environmental push to get rid of these single-use plastic bags, which are not destroying the environment, thank you very much, will find its heyday. Maybe states now punished with this lesson on failure to prepare for pandemics or any other emergency that may require a large-scale medical intervention will do so. But there are a couple other things that are going on that are probably pretty good. And that is this whole idea of sustainable cities. You know, one of the things that I've noticed is that while I think it's kind of funny to watch all of these Democrats run around and talk about how we need to shut everything down to preserve life, because every life is precious, this is the same crowd that will shut down the government if it doesn't get funding to murder innocent children in their mother's wombs for things like Planned Parenthood. All of a sudden, every life is precious. You would think that Andrew Cuomo, the governor of New York, had some sort of religious conversion and was now a preacher in defense of life. The same people who will push the right to commit suicide, the right to kill unborn children in their mother's wombs, the right to allow people to dispose of their lives as ever they see fit, now are all of a sudden converted to the cause of life. And you have to ask yourself, is their conversion to the cause of life a genuine desire to protect life, or is it a way of using the massive intrusion of government to forever change how life is lived? And I think it's probably the latter. Doesn't mean it won't be good propaganda when all this other stuff comes up to go back at them with. But we take a look at this, but maybe, just maybe, there'll be a rethink on these ideas of sustainable communities. You know, the ones that say that we should be able to live within walking distance of our grocery stores, our parks, our schools, our workplaces. Remember years ago, if you were following it, when they tried to do Planned Parenthood and sustainable Second Street, and they were coming up with all this really high density housing in very congested, narrow areas. Because, you know, if you're going to have this kind of walkability quotient and everything's going to be sustainable, you simply can't have the kind of lifestyle that middle America has grown accustomed to. You can't have that single family home with a couple thousand square feet on maybe 100 by 100 lot, or even a 53 by 100 foot lot, which is very popular here in the city of Manchester. You can't have that sort of independent living. You can't have these residential clusters outside of business areas. You have to have everything on top of each other. Well, how do you accomplish that in a world that requires social distancing to save your life? You can't have that kind of high density. I have a bet that, or a belief, I'm not betting, I'm believing, that one of the things that you're going to see is states like New Hampshire, which do not have, in my opinion, would not have had, although I did hear an interview with the governor, and I have to give him points on this, right? You know, he said, if we open up the golf courses, but Maine, Vermont, and Massachusetts don't open up the golf courses, then all these people from those states are going to come to our golf courses, and they're going to create the very problem that we're trying to protect against. Okay, but here's the thing: my bet is that more rural states, small states like New Hampshire, where you can live at a comfortable distance from your neighbors in most of the state, are going to see a whole lot of real estate activity from people outside of the state in places like Boston, Hartford, Springfield, New York City, you know, big places where, gee, maybe living in bucolic, New Hampshire would be a smart thing to do. You might see, places like Maine and Vermont that has similarly, where, Bernie Sanders, oh, you Bernie bots, you must be so devastated. Where people like Bernie Sanders have a, quote, cottage. That cottage is better than most of the mansions in North Manchester, for Pete's sake. I wish I had a cottage like that. But you may see more rural states all of a sudden become very popular places for people in congested areas around the country. Big, metropolitan areas decide it might be safer and nicer to live in, which in one way would be a very good thing, unless they bring their politics with them from these areas, in which case that could be a very bad thing, because people, when they move from areas like that, tend to try to recreate the areas they left in the areas they came to, and that can be a problem. I remember well a conversation I had with a woman in Ward 9 when I worked for Mayor Resort. This was years and years ago, and this woman would call on a weekly basis, and she would just sit there and harangue the stupid locals, and she never had anything good to say about how we did anything in Manchester. So one day I asked her, I said, where are you from? Because clearly your accent isn't a Manchester or even a New Hampshire accent. And it turns out she was from New York. Yes, she was. And I said, how is it we can be such a group of fools? I asked her, I said, why did you move here? Oh, I moved here for the quality of life and the schools and, the ability of my kids to go outside and play and all this other fun stuff. I said, isn't it interesting? You've done nothing in any of the phone calls that I've ever had with you to praise this place that you came to for the reasons you just cited. You just sit there and complain about all the things you don't have and all the things we don't do like you used to have back home. So what you're saying is you want to recreate what you left? She never called again. And I was very happy about that. I would do that because, you know what, I can only put up with it so much before I come back and do something or say something like that. And let me see, I'm noticing that maybe there's a little too much headroom there. But anyway, so, but maybe the whole idea of sustainable living or sustainable planning that piles people into tiny living quarters, in high rise or big density kind of developments, maybe that will die a swift and a swift and complete death, and stop having these economic do-gooders, these planet lovers, who now are who's isn't it funny? By the way, have you noticed that people like all of the Green New Deal people, like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and even Bernie Sanders, and all of these whack job environmentalists who complain about global warming, have you noticed they haven't said a thing about this pandemic? Have you noticed that? I have a theory about that too, folks. My theory is that they hope this pandemic runs wild and kills lots of people, because one of the things that they have tied into this idea of planet death is overpopulation. I'm reminded of what Ebenezer Scrooge said: if they're to die, let them do it quickly to reduce the surplus population. Remember that from A Christmas Carol? Well, it seems to me that in some corners, I mean, clearly there's glee throughout the press corps and even the Democratic Party that this pandemic has walloped the economy and plunged the nation into panic. The Democrats and the media never fail. And watching those press conferences, I got to tell you, I love the fact that the president called these guys out on the way they try to mislead people, the way they withhold information in their questions. It's amazing. But they're reporting this with a certain glee because they think it's the political end of Donald Trump. It's not the political end of Donald Trump. If anything, Donald Trump is getting rave reviews across the board for how he's handled this, including from corners that make me a bit nervous, but that is what it is. But all of the earthers, all of the Green New Deal, they want people to die because that will reduce the planet's carbon footprint. That'll reduce the demands on Mother Nature. That will mean, I mean, if if this were 1918 again, and this were the Spanish flu, and that many people were killed or more, they'd probably think it was awesome, just because that fewer people would be eating. So we wouldn't need as many farting cows. We wouldn't need as many big SUVs. We wouldn't need as much oil. The planet could take a bit of a reprieve because consumption on a global basis would go down. It would completely destroy the economy. And if you destroy the economy, people aren't going to work. If they're not going to work, they're not driving their cars. They're not building things. They won't be using gas or oil. They won't be using evil fossil fuels. Of course, now we're seeing the utility of all that. We're seeing the utility of the infrastructure that we've built, the economy that we've built, the facilities that we have, and hopefully we're learning the value of having them up and running in a fundamental way. They're all worried about the healthcare system. Now, I got news for you. The healthcare system doesn't really work too well without abundant electric power, and that ain't coming from windmills anytime soon, is it? Although that won't stop the Democrats, will it, from trying to jam tax breaks for windmill producers and solar panel producers and alternative energy and all the other Green New Deal crap that they tried to put in the first bill. Have you heard, by the way, there's a new stimulus bill on the way, and guess what? The Democrats, Nancy Pelosi, Chuck Schumer, they have all said, we are not going to vote for anything unless it has a nationwide requirement that every state offer mail-in voting for the presidential election. Now, a brief review of the Constitution will make it known that it is the states that get to decide the qualifications and the method of voting, not the federal government. So it would clearly be an unconstitutional mandate if they did it, but never let a good crisis go to waste is what the Democrats say, right? One of the things that they have been trying to get for years is nationwide mail-in balloting. Why? It's easy to cheat. It is almost impossible to verify the identity of mail-in ballots. You don't know who cast that ballot. You don't know how real they are or aren't. You don't know if they cast that ballot before they died or after, if anybody's even looking. It's a sham. But once again, we're going to have the Democrats try to take unrelated issues and jam it into a bill. But you know what? I hope that that forestalls things for quite a while, because as we speak, they're trying to talk about adding another $500 billion to help small businesses. Remember, they said that this package was going to be so big that we wouldn't need to do anything anytime soon. Well, in less than 10 days, the $350 billion allocated for small business is now gone, and we need at least $500 billion more. Wow. I guess if you tell people you can have money for free with no strings attached, except, oh yeah, well, you have to keep your employees on the payroll. So you got to pay them to do nothing because we shut you down. And again, in concept, I would think that this is the government's way of compensating the business for a taking. A taking is when the government removes something from the private sector or private ownership. So that's the deal. We have this taking place, and the federal government trying to compensate, state governments trying to compensate those that they took from. It's going to work in some places. It's not going to work, in my opinion, in most places. And I think you're going to see a lot of businesses go away forever and ever. Amen. Which is too bad. Would not have happened had different things been done in all likelihood. So now we need $500 billion. And guess what? Nancy Pelosi is saying she is refusing to call the House back into session to do this, which means they're going to try to pass it by, quote, unanimous consent. That's a decree, which basically says, yeah, we all agree. We don't need to discuss it. We don't need to debate it. We don't need to vote on it. Senate's trying to do the same thing. So why is it that the elected officials of the United States of America are acting as if they're non-essential employees, not coming to work, not doing their constitutional duty to discuss and vote on legislation? You know, in today's, I'm coming to you through a through Zoom, really. I'm recording this as a one-person meeting. I'm going to upload it to YouTube. I'm going to send it to Manchester Public TV, and hopefully it's going to run when it's supposed to run, right? That would be great. So why in today's technology age can we not even gain a virtual meeting of our elected government, whether it's in Washington, D.C. or Concord, New Hampshire? The governor's got extraordinary authority right now because the legislature, out of an abundance of caution and to set the right example for all our non-essential businesses, are they saying they're non-essential? Refuses to meet to discuss legislation that probably would be more appropriate for the things that have been done than what the governor has authority to do on his own. Again, this isn't a knock on Sununu. I get where he's at. I get what he's trying to do. I do think, as with governors across the state, it sets a horrible precedent and will be abused at some point in the future, not necessarily by them, but by their successors who will use this as a reason why they can do something they want to do in the future. And it will all fall apart from there. So why can't we at least get a real discussion using web conferencing video technology? I want to tip my hat to Congressman Thomas Massey of Kentucky, who is fighting a lonely fight on this to try to draw attention to it. He's right. And what's happening at every turn in this country with these matters is utterly unconstitutional, and in my opinion, is extremely irresponsible. We've gotten to a point in time now where we know which areas of the country are significantly impacted and which aren't, and it's about time that we start allowing the governors to do what they deem is best in their state. Clearly, New York, New Jersey, and other areas need a different set of rules than Nebraska, Idaho, Iowa, and Wyoming, even New Hampshire. The idea that a one-size-fits-all has never been more wrong in application to a problem than it is right now. There is no reason why Alaska needs to be governed by the same rules that New York needs to be governed by. You can do what you need to do in the areas you need to do it without plunging everybody into economic darkness, social isolation, and everything that's coming from this. And we know what's coming from this. We're seeing mental health issues escalate on an order of scale that is truly frightening. We're seeing domestic violence. We're seeing communities that, because of the COVID-19 virus, are refusing to enforce their laws to protect their law enforcement officers from getting an infection. And, hats off to the 4 Manchester police officers who contracted to COVID-19. We wish you a speedy recovery. However, that doesn't mean we should not allow them, like the building department's not allowing them, to do their jobs. We have jobs to do, people. Would we be keeping everybody home if it were a particularly bad flu season, which still, by the way, infects, hospitalizes, and kills more people than this virus will? We've never done that before. By the way, did you know that almost 10% of the deaths in the state of New Hampshire on an annual basis come from pneumonia and the flu? Did you know that? How come we haven't shut anything down to protect people from pneumonia and the flu? Right now, the projections are 32 people in the state of New Hampshire will die from COVID-19. That's a far cry from 10% of the population. But we're not shutting anything down. So, in a way it goes. Look, I know some of you agree with this take. I know others of you disagree with it. Some of you think that I am not whatsoever. I am not saying that COVID-19 is not real. What I am saying is the response to it, in my never to be humble opinion as your ever humble host, is unreal. It is unwarranted, and it is worse than the problem. You've heard the joke. The doctor comes out of the operating room to talk to the family. He says, well, I have good news and bad news. I'll start with the good news. And the good news is the surgery was a success. Well, doctor, if the surgery was a success, what's the bad news? Well, the bad news is the patient died. But the surgery was a success. We have to be careful not to be that patient. And right now, I'm drawing somewhat to the skeptical side of thinking that we're going to be able to restart this economy and get things moving again to repair the damage that's been done. There's going to be lasting economic damage. There's going to be lasting cultural and social damage. There's going to be lasting criminal damage as people, and you can see the videos have been all over social media. You can see people in areas, criminals being released from prison because to protect them from COVID-19 in communities where the police are not going to enforce the law, going on crime sprees. And I don't know about you, I think that's kind of a bad idea, and I think it's a lethal combination. And you know, you get everyone from mass murderers to you know, financial criminals petitioning to get out of prison to protect themselves from the COVID-19 virus. Oh, and let's not forget the illegal aliens that are trying to get out because of that too. So here it is, folks. We are tossing everything to the Constitution, any norm of civil order, out the window. Now, maybe one of the good things that come are all the emergency decrees that have said to states, you know, if West Virginia, which doesn't have a problem with this almost at all, has got spare doctors that they want to, you know, that want to go help in New York City, New York, you've got to recognize that West Virginia doctor as a doctor in New York. You can't say, oh, no, you're not licensed here, you can't practice. So maybe there are some good things that will end up coming out of this, but at some point too, folks, I think we have to have an honest to goodness gut check that says, is this who we are as Americans? Is this how we are to face challenges in the future? Are we to go into mass hysteria, mass panic mode, and impose these massive government interventions on our lives, our economy, our individual freedoms, our families? And are we to basically be expected to crawl under our beds, curl up into a fetal position, and suck our thumbs until it goes over? Or are we to find a way, as America has always done, are we to find a way to make it to work every day, to make sure the country remains productive, safe, competitive, and moving forward? Because I'll tell you what, if I were one of our enemies, I'd be looking at how America has responded to this, and I would be wondering what kind of havoc I could cause on the world's only superpower if I released a virus that was, let's just say, not natural to gain an advantage. And by the way, more and more every day is coming out to say that China engineered this virus. I think one of the good things that might come out of this is that the mistakes that the Clinton and Bush administrations and the Obama administration made by shipping lock, stock, and barrel wholesale entire manufacturing industries like those that make pharmaceuticals, especially vaccines and various, you know, medical equipment, et cetera, to China, I think you're going to see an awful lot of that coming home for good. In any event, I am running short on time. As always, you can reach me through Girard at Large on the web. You can reach me through Facebook and Twitter, also at Girard at Large. Until next week, be good, be well. Don't do anything I wouldn't do. We're proud to have in the audience. Thanks for being there. And I will say as I close, those of you who are interested in getting an objective eye, a second opinion, or some input on how your investments are doing, let me take what I've done over the last 18 years at no cost to you. Take a look at it, give you some insight. It's purely a public service to you. Just give me a call at 624-8558. And those of you who use that number to leave anonymous profanity-laced messages about my criticism of the teacher's contract and tried to make it apply that I hate teachers and had no right to criticize them, I can still like teachers without liking the union leadership that negotiated the contract, and certainly without liking the contract. In any event, more on that and oh, so much more when we get together again. Until then, be good. Good night.